And we're joined this segment by Brian Chiasson. He's a Canadian radio talk show host, a regular co-host on this program and contributor. He's a writer. Brian, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Brian, you're right in the thick of the latest terrorist situation, apparently a lone wolf who may have connections with others, who is a radical Islamist, has bullets have flown around the Parliament building in Ottawa. A young man who was standing guard at the War Memorial has been brutally murdered and shot down. The city has been in lockdown. This is a terrible attack in the heart of Canada, obviously a nation that we generally view as a mecca of peace and stability. What is going on from your perspective over there?
Yeah, it was the second time in a week that Canadian soldiers were attacked. You know, a gunman targeted a military reservist who was guarding the National War Memorial. Captain Nathan Cirillo. He was a 24-year-old father of one. Oh, man. Makes me want to cry. A reservist with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada. He was standing as a sentry at the tomb of the unknown soldier when he was executed at 9:52 in the morning. This was a revered symbol where he was standing, the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was a revered symbol of the brave men and women who gave their lives for our country. He was unarmed. This guy comes along. This is Michael Zahav Bibo. He was 32, Canadian-born convert to Islam, a recent convert to Islam. Mm-hmm. He was guilty of all kinds of crimes. He'd been living in a hostel. His parents are saying how they have a hard time not hating him for doing what he did. Long black hair, a black and white Palestinian headscarf. After shooting this guy twice, point blank range, he raised his arms in triumph. Our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, called it a cold-blooded murder, a terror attack on our values. So, and just less than 48 hours earlier, there was another attack in Quebec, the province next door. Canada is made up of 12 provinces, well, 13 because the Northern Territories was divided up. And Ontario and Quebec are in the center. I'm in Ontario, which is where Toronto is located. It's also where Ottawa is located. Ottawa is where the shooting took place. It's 4 hours away, 400 kilometers. The Quebec is another couple. Well, actually, it's right next door. It's bordered. But depending on where you go, Montreal is known for Quebec. You know, Montreal is the big city there. But a guy named Martin Rouleau, who was also a convert to Islam, he went and ran over a soldier less than 48 hours earlier. So twice in 1 week. This guy in Ottawa with the Palestinian headscarf, he wanted to go over in Syria and join ISIS and to kill some people over there. And Canada wouldn't let him go. He wasn't even on the RCMP, that's our National Police Force, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP. They weren't even on their radar, this guy, which doesn't speak well for the RCMP. They've got like 80 or 90 people on their radar, people who are not allowed to fly, who are not allowed to have passports. In fact, in the last few years, we've been putting legislation in place to remove passports and citizenship from people who are in any way thought to be connected with terrorism. On the foolish side of things, we got this politician. He's a kid. He's like just over 40 years old. Justin Trudeau. It's remarkable. I mean, he's like, Joe Biden. He's almost everything that comes out of his mouth is so susceptible to ridicule. And the media covers up for him, just like they do for Joe Biden and Obama down in the...
Brian, is Justin Trudeau related to the former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
Yes. Now, in the case of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, while I vehemently disagreed with his politics, the man was brilliant. He was smart.
Right.
His son is nowhere near being smart. I don't think it'll happen in his lifetime, although I could be wrong. But Trudeau, just like the American media, the Canadian media is just as bad, if not worse. And our politicians can be, particularly easily comparable to the Democrats, in terms of not wanting to identify. They won't say the word Islamist. In fact, one of the theories going around is the reason why Obama won't say Islamic State instead of ISIL or ISIS is because he doesn't want to use the word Islamist in there or Islamic. He doesn't want to associate the two. But Justin Trudeau, the reason why I brought him up, this guy's coddling these guys. He's criticizing Stephen Harper for wanting to prevent them from having passports. He's arguing silly arguments like, what is this, two-tier citizenship? And Stephen Harper, he's the conservative. Yeah. When he took over power, he did something that no previous prime minister has done in Canada. He decided to make an immediate stand and a strong stand with Israel and the Jews. Now, when he did that, because the Liberals have always, like your Democrats, I don't know if your Democrats have been doing this, but the Liberals in Canada they've been playing footsies with all the terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the rest of them. They've been allowing, because they'll give funds to the Liberal Party and support the Liberal Party with votes, they allow all kinds of shenanigans to go on, including having fundraisers and sending the money to terrorist countries and to support groups and stuff. And so now, because Stephen Harper, when he got elected several years ago, more than a decade ago, he stood up with Israel right away. First time in Canada that's happened. When he did, Jewish groups all across Canada, they had these big meetings out in the public and tore up their cards to the Liberal Party, saying that they were now standing with Stephen Harper. So I think part of the strategy
Harper's been he's been in power for a while, and he's pretty well popular. I think he's been in office now for a good 10 years, hasn't he?
Yeah, and he's also Maclean's magazine, which is a Canadians magazine, ranked him just a few years ago as the smartest politician in Canada. That nobody is as smart as he is, and he is brilliant. Now, I think he's, because of his stand with Israel and the Jews, it put Trudeau in a bad predicament. The young Trudeau. Pierre is dead. He's gone.
Understood. Yeah. Justin.
So the Justin Trudeau is in an odd predicament, but he makes foolish decisions now because he knows he's not going to get the Jewish vote back. And there's an election next year, 2015, for the federal party. Yours is in 2016, but here it's 2015. He's courting the Muslims. He's been going around to all the mosques, including those that support terrorism, although he claims he denies that he knows anything about that. But it's well known that some of these mosques, particularly the Wahhabi mosques, which he said he's been to, they're supporting terrorism. And yet he's claiming he's going there because he wants to bridge the gap, like as if, they'll chop his head off,
Sure.
As soon as
the same thing, Brian, the same thing is going on here in Boston, where I am, in that we've had now Lady Al-Qaeda, who graduated from Brandeis University, a Jewish university, and then went on to become head of the propaganda, a plan to chemically attack New York City with the Taliban. She was captured by U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, and apparently some of the beheadings now being done by ISIS is to try to get her free. She's like a cause celeb amongst the international Islamists and the left-wing appeasers. We also have someone else from Boston who has gone on to become the chief kind of website propaganda guy for ISIS. And Boston is a hotbed for these radical terrorists. It's right down the street from where I am right now. There's a big neighborhood of Muslims, quite frankly, and pro-Palestinian Arabs. And they're covered by the Boston Globe and by the establishment here with bouquets of, that we all are so wonderfully tolerant. And there's this same blind eye turn to these realities. Now, my question to you, Brian, is about the terrorists who attacked Ottawa and the other guy who also attacked in Canada previously. And now we have one apparently yesterday in New York City. And the similarity I see there, because we should look at this scientifically, we should be examining this like you examine a plane crash. What can you learn from it? What went wrong? What can be done to improve it? It's like any other accident. It's like, was the plane flying too much? Was there a design problem? And I think that when you take a look at this situation clinically, you see certain similarities that we can learn from. All right, we'll pick that thread up as soon as we take a break. Brian Chiasson and I are here at Thank you very much. Brian Chiasson and I are co-hosting this hour today. We're talking about the attack in Canada, what we can learn from it. Brian, as I was saying, we can look at this thing scientifically. Right now, the information coming out of New York is very sketchy. But there was a conspiracy to attack people in New York City, and that the perpetrator was also a recently converted Muslim who had writings and manifestos posted on his website which have a very much of a leftist hue. Anti-American, anti-Zionism, conspiracy by the white race to enslave black people. He was a former student at the Columbia University, which has a lot of very radical left professors and culture. A guest on this program, actually, Kevin Barrett, Professor Kevin Barrett, is one of these same types. He's a leftist professor who converted to Islam and who now supports jihad. And this guy in Canada seems to be of that ilk. So I think what we can deduce is that there is a problem with leftists who are now finding their new revolution as Muslims fighting the jihad, and that there are philosophical similarities, to put it mildly, between revolution and jihad. What do we know about this guy? Was he also of that ilk, the one in Ottawa?
Well, in the case of, just let me comment for a minute on Columbia University. They're well known around the world for their School of Journalism. and they're definitely left. They got some real radicals in that place. And I don't know why. Do you remember? Did you see that program on TV? Bill Maher and what's his name? There was
that nincompoop actor. I know who you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought
the knucklehead from Argus. Yeah.
Are you familiar with psychological projection?
Yes, I am.
Just for the sake of helping your audience to understand, psychological projection is when a person projects themselves onto somebody else and assumes that other people would behave the same way they would in the same circumstances, which might not be true at all. So just to give you a couple of examples to make it really clear, if I'm honest, I'm assuming that everybody else that I meet out there, unless they give me a reason to believe otherwise, is honest, just because I believe they're like me. Now, if I'm a liar, I believe everybody else I meet is a liar, just like me. That's psychological projection. You project yourself onto I think one of the big problems that the left have is that they assume that because they are so into using words like bigotry and racism and homophobia and all these other words to label people, that they're so afraid themselves of being labeled that way that they don't want to say something that has to do like identifying it as Islam, because in their minds they see it as being so racist that they don't want to be. They're so afraid of being labeled themselves with the passion with which they like to hate others. But in the case of this guy moving from Columbia University and their leftism, in the case of this guy in Ottawa, he was actually really well planned. This was not just a random thing. He had this planned. All around Parliament Hill, you have streets like Bank Street that they're covered with malls, plazas. You walk down the street and it's just stores and vendors everywhere. They make a mint when people are out spending their money, particularly tourists. So there was like hundreds of people, just like 1-2 blocks from where this guy went, from Parliament Hill. Hundreds of people. Mm-hmm. If he wanted to take life, it was there to take. He could have killed hundreds of people if he had been properly armed. But he didn't do that. He went to the memorial, killed the guy because of what the memorial represented. Then he got into one of the officials' cars. It wasn't his car. He had used another car to get there. He got into another car, drove over to Parliament Hill, because that car would be accepted on Parliament Hill, and then he walks through the front doors. So he knew what he was doing. And the minute he went in, the two guards at the door, they're not armed either. They just basically
murder. And they seem to be people who were radical leftists who converted to Islam and who are now radical Islamist leftists. It brings up questions of the congruity between radical leftism and Islam, or devout Islamism, we should say. What do they have in common philosophically? Is this the new radical revolutionary movement? Are these the new Black Panthers? And we need to understand this so we can protect ourselves. I mean, this is a phenomenon that's growing. You know, I mean, these are people who are going to be, if they can attack in Ottawa, they can attack anywhere. Brian?
Oh, yeah. And just to continue with the story, is the gunman had gone into the building, and there was about 20 steps to climb. And the policeman was at the top of the 27 steps, saw the rifle, ran down those stairs, grabbed the nozzle, and then he got shot in the leg when he threw the nozzle to the ground, so that if it went off, it would hit the floor. Now, he started shouting immediately, "Gun, gun, gun." And the guy knew he was going to get in trouble now, because he either had to move in or move out. and he moved in. He ran up those 20 stairs, and he started going down the hallway. And of course, everybody in the building heard those two. The shot that went off. They heard the two earlier, but they weren't sure it was gunshots when they were inside the building because the memorial was like across the street. So actually, it was across the parking lot, not the street. But all the guards in the building were now on high alert. They knew something was going on, particularly with somebody shouting "gun, gun, gun," and so they all started moving down the hallway. And this guy, he ran down the hallway, and he went right by the two rooms that one of them he wanted to get into. On one side, the south side, was the NDP. They're the far left of the parties. There's three different, well, arguably four, but three different parties in Parliament. The Liberals, the NDP, which is the New Democrats, they're the far left, and the Conservatives. So the NDP were on the left. He wasn't so concerned with them, but he wanted to go north into the Conservative caucus, which is where the Prime Minister was, along with all the Conservatives, the people who were keeping him from getting out of the country. But because he had all these security guards and police officers and RCMP, chasing him, he went down the hall into another room to barricade himself. And he was still shooting. There's bullet holes in the building. You can see how they ricocheted in the places where they hit and the damage that was done. And one guy who was retired from the RCMP, he was just there to do some voluntary work, just sort of traditional stuff. And so he got down on the floor, and he crawled his way towards that door where he was hiding behind. And when he came out, he gave him a double tap and put him down. But and so now he's the hero, even though he was retired and hadn't practiced in years. But But yeah, it's a shame that people have mindsets. Mind you, of course, it's groups like the Islamic State that are looking for people who have, dispositions that will go in that direction, whether they're easily angered or whether they've got psychological problems or whether they're prone to crime or
Here, Brian's a Canadian radio host. We're talking about the attack in Ottawa. Brian, we've talked about the particulars around that awful incident. Where is Canada going to go from here? I mean, how are they going to take steps, if they are, and what are they, to ensure that it doesn't happen again?
Well, that's a good question, because Stephen Harper and a few of his people from Cabinet, they've been working hard to try to do something about this for a few years. This is not new to them. The problem is that we've got two different parties, the NDP, which is extreme left, and the Liberals, who normally would be more center, except that they're trying to take away ground from the extreme left, so they've moved to the left. Now, both those parties are fighting Stephen Harper and the Conservatives on trying to put in good policies. Just because, like, for instance, when one of the cabinet ministers referred to the practices of Islamists in the Middle East, like the whole idea of beheading people and punishing women and hanging homosexuals and what's that, circumcision, with girls. Like one of the cabinet ministers called such practices barbarian, and then Trudeau comes out and criticizes them for using the word barbarian, saying that that's not true. Well, if that isn't barbarian, then what is?
Well, Brian, let me ask you this. I mean, if that's the position of the Trudeau and the left the Liberal Party and the far left. I don't think that doesn't sound to me like it's going to get much traction among the Canadian people, liberal or conservative. I mean, Canada is under assault. They don't want to talk about the niceties of whether or not to call someone a barbarian. I mean, I would think that they would be getting behind an effort to stop this problem. And it's
Chuck Morse speaks.
Okay, Brian Chiasson and I are talking about the situation in Ottawa in the aftermath of this terrible murder. Brian, so I don't think that Canadians, at least from my distant perspective here in Boston, are going to have any sympathy for mincing words about the enemy they confront. You know, there's over 100 people in Canada that have made their way to ISIS. What's going on? I mean, what do you think the policy is going to be?
Yeah, before I go there, let me just ask your audience to get their pens ready because I want to give out some information in a little bit before I go. But going back to what you just said, approximately 67%, depending on the polls, some have it over 70%, are in agreement with Harper on this. The problem with elections, though, is, and we've got an election coming up next year, is that people vote because of personalities and because of name recognition. And all the media is pushing, because they're all left-wing, most of them, except one, they're all pushing Justin Trudeau because he's young, he's 40-something, and he's cool, and he's good-looking, and all the girls like him. He hasn't got any policies except that he wants to legalize marijuana, but he hasn't got any policies on anything, and he's completely pro-abortion. He had pro-lifers running for him, and he shut them all out. So he's, but it's because people aren't informed, and they're not interested in his policies. People, women and men, particularly the younger crowd, they're saying they don't care. They like the fact that he looks good, you know, and he thinks he was. But can you imagine him dealing with Putin on the world stage? He'd get creamed.
You know, he sounds to me like another Obama.
He's worse than Obama. He's a Joe Biden. But
well, he's an empty suit, basically. I mean, the people can impose upon him anything they want because there's nobody there. It's just it's an image, and that. I mean, I would think that Canada would take a lesson from the United States and take a look at what a disaster Obama's been, and he's not popular right now. You even have, in this midterm election, Jean Shaheen from New Hampshire, who voted with Obama 99% of the time. She won't even admit that she supports him. I mean, you know, they're moving away from him like Chesapeake Bay crabs in a bay. You know, they're all moving sideways. So
most of the media is left wing, and they try to make Obama look good. But now, and down in the States,
but
I don't
not
know
so
if
much anymore.
Are you familiar with Temple University?
Yes, in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. They've got a course now where they're teaching guerrilla activism using Che Guevara. You know, so I mean, they're practically, you know, starting this culture of grooming terrorists. But I mean, anyway, what I should do is mention before it's time to go, and I won't be able to talk to you anymore. If your audience has got pens ready, there's a guy in Canada. You don't have to write this down. I'm just giving you the information, the preamble leading up to it. His name is Ezra, E-Z-R-A, Levant, L-E-V-A-N-T. Just happens to be the same spelling as the ISIL, you know, the Levant in there. But this guy's good. He's a very much a conservative, and he's probably one of the best, if not the best, talk show host in Canada. He's got his own TV program. Now, because of this terrorism that just happened, he started, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, I think it was just yesterday, he started a fund for the victims of the terrorism, the two men. And one of those men have a little boy who will never see his dad again and might not even realize it yet. Because he probably doesn't understand and he might not be even being told what's going on yet. But so what Ezra is doing is raising money. He won't get any of it to support the two families. And last night, at about 10 o'clock at night, the fund was at $6,000. So I think he just started it yesterday because he wants to raise $100,000. And all the money, aside from the credit card charges, all money, 100% of it's going to go to the families, divided between them. And he's asking for $100,000, although I think he's going to beat that because right now he's at $27,243. But the website to go to is Proud Canada, one word, proudcanada.ca, not .com, .ca, which stands for Canada. Proudcanada.com. What it'll do, it'll take you to Indiegogo.com. And then you make your contribution on there. You know, he's asking if you can do $100, great. If you can't, if you can only do 5 or 10 or whatever.
All eyes are on Kansas this midterm election. I've heard people on NPR, particularly here in Boston, where I am, practically drooling over the thought of Pat Roberts losing his seat, giving Obama and Harry Reid a victory, allowing for Obamacare to not be challenged with the waivers going forward, allowing possibly upwards of 20 million immigrants to get amnesty, and the entire leftist agenda moving forward. So the whole nation is watching to see if Pat Roberts survives and if perhaps the president and his leftist agenda can be stopped, along with Harry Reid, in the U.S. Senate, which is very important. And to discuss this subject, we are joined by several people who are involved in Kansas politics. We've got Burdett Loomis here. He's a professor of political science at the University of Kansas. Taylor Bowditch, who is a spokesman for the Tea Party Express. Kevin Broughton is a national communications director for the Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund. Let me start with you, Professor Loomis. What's going on the ground over there in Kansas, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, I think that if we'd have looked 6 months ago, nobody had Pat Roberts on anybody's list of challenged incumbents. I don't think people felt that Roberts was, a spectacular senator or anything, but solid 3 terms. Clearly, he had a Tea Party challenge over the summer. Our August primary demonstrated, when he only got 48% of the vote, that he was weak. Polls came out immediately thereafter showing him losing both to an independent and to a Democrat in head-to-head contests. Very quickly, the Democrat bowed out, and so now we have this strange contest of Pat Roberts, a 3-term incumbent, running against independent Greg Orman, who says he doesn't know who he'll caucus with. Certainly Roberts is painting him as a liberal Democrat. But honestly, I think here that really the race, although Roberts talks about Harry Reid and getting rid of him, etc., honestly, it is a race not focusing much on ideology at all. It's focusing on a 34-year-old congressional veteran, 78 years old, who really has lost 2 or 3 steps. And honestly, the Republicans in the state would have been ecstatic if he had retired and had somebody else run this time.
First of all, what happened to Chad Taylor? Why did he withdraw from the race? He being the Democrat.
Right. He was really a fairly weak candidate. Never raised very much money. I don't think he was ever honestly very serious about getting into the race, even though he did run in the primary. Barely won over someone who didn't campaign at all. And I think he got substantial pressure. Claire McCaskill, among others, mostly Democrats at the national level, not the Kansas level, to get him out of the race. He did. There was some, politicking about that, but at the end of the day, he's off the ballot. And Orman, with an I behind his name and not a D, has proven to be a relatively formidable candidate.
He doesn't take a position on any issues. He voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012.
No, he voted for Romney in 2012.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
He's a former Democrat. The money is pouring in from the Democratic Party. It looks to me, and maybe this is my Massachusetts experience, but this looks like a straw candidate to me.
And he's
going
over the years, Democrats have talked about this, and they absolutely have talked about this, about how it would be the best way to win would be not to field a Democrat, field an independent, and that would be the avenue. And I think Democrats in the state, wish they were so clever as to have done this. I think it's worked out that way. I think it's worked out exactly the way you're talking about, but without any kind of preconception at all. I think in the end, Democrats are perfectly happy with this. What happens, and I think national Democrats have spent some money on behalf of Orman, although far less than Republicans on behalf of Roberts. But Kansas Democrats are put in a position of really keeping their hands totally off this race. The moment Kansas Democrats do anything for Orman,
sure. Well, it might expose
it backfires.
Yeah, I mean, the jig will be up. All right, let me welcome aboard Matt Hickam. He's with Hickam Public Affairs. Matt, what say you with regard to Orman being a straw candidate?
Well, I think that that Orman is just that. There is no doubt what Orman's true colors are in this race. He is an independent by name only, strictly because it's very difficult for a Democrat to be elected to the U.S. Senate in the state of Kansas, Kansas being a reliably Republican state since the U.S. Civil War. The irony of this particular race is that Roberts would not be in this situation if he weren't so incredibly bloodied after a very, very difficult primary with the Kansas City area physician Milton Wolfe. And because of all of those, the difficult primary, it actually weakened Roberts so much that it allows a candidate like Orman to come in and take advantage of that.
I see. All right, we've got Taylor Bowditch here. He's the spokesman for the Tea Party Express. Taylor, Milton Wolfe was the Tea Party guy. He lost in the primary. To the incumbent. Is the Tea Party going to get behind Roberts, or are they going to allow for Harry Reid to continue in the U.S. House and allow Obamacare to go forward and 20 million illegals to get citizenship?
No, I mean, and we've said since day one, since after the 2012 election, that 2014 for us was about taking back the Senate to stop all those, in our view, horrendous things from happening. So we duked it out in the primary. Our candidate came up short. And so right now what's most important, we feel, is still to take back the Senate and defend some of these seats that have become more competitive in the last couple weeks. And so that's why we went, early last week on Monday to Kansas, and we held a press conference with Senator Pat Roberts to endorse him, and we had local Tea Party leaders from across the state join us. So, I think what we've seen in Kansas particularly, and even in South Dakota, which has a very, very similar tint to the story that's unfolding in Kansas, is that the competitiveness might have caught a lot of observers by surprise, but the entire conservative movement has now coalesced behind Senator Pat Roberts and in South Dakota Governor Mike Round. So it's might have caught some people by surprise, but everyone's awake now and ready to fight.
Okay, I mean, that's encouraging. All right, we've got Kevin Broughton here, National Communications Director for the Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund. Kevin, is this the phenomenon nationally? Is the Tea Party getting behind Republicans, even some that we may not like? We would rather see more conservatives, but yet we understand that for the good of the country, we have to stop this leftist agenda.
Generally, yes, Chuck. I think that's going to be the case. We're watching Kansas. The Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund we endorsed Milt Wolf. We would have liked to have gotten there a little sooner. We were tied up with a race in Mississippi that had 3 weeks of election overtime. But generally speaking, yes. And we make endorsements when there's consensus among our grassroots folks at the local level. If there's consensus behind a candidate, there was a consensus behind Milt Wolf. And right now we're in the process of sort of polling and gauging our members' feelings with regard to a Pat Roberts endorsement. Would not be shocked if that happened in the early part of next week. But yes, to answer your question,
okay.
While as Taylor said, while some of our candidates did come up short, the only way to slow down the Obama agenda is to take away Harry Reid's majority and his nuclear option.
Kevin, is the National Tea Party prepared to endorse Scott Brown in New Hampshire? That's a race that is absolute neck and neck. They're tied. You've got, and yet Scott Brown ran in the primary against Bob Smith, who was favored by the Tea Party. And a recent poll indicates that Tea Party members in New Hampshire are not supporting Scott Brown, which means that Jean Shaheen, who is to the left of Stalin, and who voted 99% with Obama. She voted more with Obama than did Bernie Sanders. She's going to be returned to the Senate. Yeah, I mean, is there any way you can move the needle in New Hampshire?
Well, I can tell you what we've been doing there for 6 weeks, and that is we've had a ground game deployed to help Scott Brown and to send Red Jean Shaheen, I guess, packing after one term.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had folks out there vigorously doing get-out-the-vote operations for the last 6 weeks in New Hampshire. Yes, sir.
Excellent. I'm glad to know that. Professor Loomis, Kansas does seem to also have an interesting split between the national congressional delegation and the governor's office, where you elected Kathleen Sebelius, after all, who was one of the main. Burnett, are you there? All right, we're just having a couple of technical issues here. Yeah, you're on. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm asking you about Kathleen. Taylor, would you like to take that one?
Well, first off, I would say that we now have endorsed Pat Roberts, and so I'm not going to maybe be as critical as I was when we were trying to campaign against him. But I would say that the general sentiment is that and this has been a driving factor of the Tea Party movement, is to just get fresh blood and fresh ideas into D.C. And that's been a sentiment that I think we found in a lot of different states. And so it's a similar sentiment to the anti-establishment sentiment that has been so powerful. And it's not necessarily a litmus test of what certain key votes, as much as it is the general picture of getting somebody in there with some new ideas that might shake it up, that might bring on fights that otherwise wouldn't be fought. There's this culture of in Washington D.C. of not to shake the apple cart too much, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. And I think we've had so many years of stagnation that there's a lot of feeling that we need to get some new ideas in there, get some new leaders in there, and people that are going to last for another 20 years, 30 years, that might be the new voice of a conservative movement. So I think that was the general theme during the primary is something new, a newer, bolder, stronger candidate, and that's I would say the driving factor behind our endorsing of Milton Wolf, and it was true in a lot of other key races. And I would say, you brought up Tennessee. I would have said, and I think it's this general election is proving it to be true, is that Pat Roberts is more of a vulnerable candidate than Lamar Alexander in Tennessee. So it's just the race dynamics really affect the decision making when you go and decide where you're going to spend resources.
Taylor, has Milton Wolf endorsed Roberts? And is he out there campaigning for him? What's he doing?
No, I don't believe he has. He to my knowledge, he hasn't. And that was as of Monday when I was in Kansas, this past Monday, he had not. So.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
let me ask you, Matt.
I would encourage him to. I thought it would be the right decision to bring everyone together, and that's why we were there. But
he's a bitter ender. Matt Highcomb, what is the role of the Libertarian candidate Randall Batson? Is he a figure now? Is he playing a factor?
I don't expect the Libertarian candidate to garner any more of a percentage in this particular race than the Libertarian has gained in the past, and I think it's really uncertain whether or not the Libertarian will take more from
Speaks.
Thank you very much, Kevin Broughton, National Communications Director for the Tea Party Patriot Citizens Fund, was in the middle of a comment during the break. Kevin, please continue.
Thanks, Chuck. You asked about outreach, and as Senate primaries have played themselves out, and you've seen these conservative candidates come up short across the country, and the establishment candidates have prevailed. The outreach can work both ways, and maybe conservative activists out there are looking for a reason to go out and vote. Now, obviously, taking the majority away from Harry Reid is motivation in and of itself. But it seems like there can be hands reaching out from both sides in a situation like this.
For sure. I mean, look, it's not a matter of being against third-party candidates, and certainly not libertarian. But the fact is that the Democrats, first in Maine, when they were able to defeat Olympia Snow, a very liberal Republican, with a so-called independent who then registered as Democrat right after winning. And in Virginia, where you had, Clinton guy Chris McAuliffe become governor because of a three-way triangulation, that these people are really not representing the true values of the libertarian movement. They're stooges. They're just fronts for the Democrats. It's a decision that's been made by it seems to me, by the Democratic campaign people as a way to win when they're not popular. What say you, Matt? Do you notice that either? Matt Hickam, that is.
That as far as the Libertarian candidates are concerned in Kansas, I think Roberts in particular has seen a good amount of blowback from the anti-Washington sentiment, and that you're going to have a good core group of Libertarians that are going to vote for the Libertarian in Kansas. Libertarians were fairly strong during the Perot race back in 1992. However, there's a good number of individuals that are just tired of Washington, and like the Tea Party representative said, there is a sort of a throw the bums out type of mentality, and I think maybe Libertarians could garner some of that support as well.
Very good. Burdett Loomis, what say you with regard to the influence of third parties in Kansas?
I think the Libertarians may be a place both in the governor's race and the senator's race where people don't want to vote for Roberts for one reason or another. Some of them who have backed Milton Wolfe will find it very difficult to vote for Orman and may park themselves in the Libertarian camp. And I agree that it pretty much cuts against Orman and Roberts similarly, and similarly in the governor's race. The governor's race really has a pretty attractive Libertarian who's done a fair amount of advertising and is pretty visible. And I do think it'll be fascinating when you get to the polling booth for some of these Republicans who Brownback and Roberts are really working on to come back home. Whether they'll do that or maybe just stop at the Libertarian camp. One further thing, I do think that in talking about why Roberts was opposed, I think that that's a good rationale. That really, he was very conservative. He moved his voting record over the last 10 years farther to the right, and I think most people here thought he'd done enough. But I do think that earlier than people in Kansas, the Tea Party folks, or the Tea Party folks in Kansas at least, really did see this lack of energy, that this guy who'd been there not just 34 years in Congress, but he's been there since 1967 as a staffer. And to an extent, Orman is benefiting from that. He's regardless of partisanship, he is a fresh face. He's a businessman who's made a lot of money, and I really do think he presents himself as someone who is going to go and, as you say, shake things up.
The spokesman for the Tea Party Express. Taylor, I have a question for you. It seems to me, and I'm speaking here as an outsider, that Governor Brownback is in trouble. I'm listening to liberal radio up here in Boston, and they're drooling over this. I mean, that they say that Brownback is being accused of economic problems in Kansas, where the surrounding states are doing better, that he cut the education budget, which is causing problems with the education, and they're just lapping their chops. What's going on with Brownback? I mean, what does that race look like?
I'll start off with saying, as a federal political action committee, we only focus on federal races, so that's Senate, House, and President. So I'm a little bit tuned out of the gubernatorial races, and I know coming into this cycle that I would say that the Democrats thought that they were going to be able to pick up a lot more governorships than it looks like what's turning out. I think Brownback's definitely one of the more competitive races, but our success in 2010 kind of put us in a position where we're playing defense in many of these states. I mean, I probably know as much as you do on those issues as far as it's a competitive race, but I think that a lot of the conservatives throughout the state, when we were there for Pat Roberts, all we were hearing about is how we need to defend Governor Brownback and how people are getting out. And I think it's the people that might be less inclined to vote for Pat Roberts are going to end up, I think the Governor Brownback election is going to end up helping Senator Pat Roberts in that regard, is that a lot of conservatives throughout the state seem to be very supportive of the governor, and even if they're still lukewarm on the senator, they're still going to be going out to vote and voting down tickets. So I think that election is going to help each other, and especially since the Senate race is becoming nationalized, I think that's going to trickle down to help the governor as well. So I think there's a little bit of the take two to tango happening right now.
Matt Hickam, do you think that Brownback helps or hurts Roberts?
A symbiotic relationship, actually. What I would say is that the increase in conservative turnout for Roberts, given that this is a race that could affect the U.S. Senate, more conservatives turning out.
Yes. Other guests. I understand what Taylor Verdovich was saying about wanting to get rid of having fresh blood in Washington, and I agree with that for the most part. What concerns me is when an anti-incumbency mindset becomes mindless, where it just because we're just going to go after incumbents just for the sake of going after incumbents. And other than Pat Roberts not having a residency in Kansas, again, I didn't really see any reason. I realized that the Tea Party Patriots are a consensus group, so you kind of had to do with what the grassroots wanted, which is a good thing. But I guess I still don't really understand the sentiment that was to get rid of Pat Roberts. Do you think it was just an anti-incumbent sentiment that he kind of got caught up in, or what do you think happened?
Yes, but I don't think it's quite that simple. I think there are a couple of factors in play. I think, number one, it's not just fresh blood. I think that since 2012, within the conservative grassroots, there grew an urgency really to be more combative in opposing the Obama administration. You've seen it in the last couple of House leadership elections on the other side of the Capitol, But there is a cry, I think, for a more aggressive stance taking on Obama. Policy-wise, look, Pat Roberts had a pretty solid conservative voting record, no argument here, and he's been really good on amnesty. And so we're proud to support him on that here in the general. He and his staff did take a special exemption from Obamacare that wasn't available to rank and file Kansans, and so that was a policy issue where we called him to account. But again, that's water under the bridge at this point.
Andre?
Oh, no, I'm pretty much done, Chuck. You can go ahead.
Okay, I mean, let me get back to Burdett Loomis, professor of political science. Burdett, so you say that, there's a similar phenomenon in Massachusetts where I am, in that right now the latest poll indicates that the Republican, who's a liberal Republican, but nevertheless, in many ways, pretty conservative, certainly on fiscal issues, he's beating the Democrat by 10 points in Massachusetts, the bluest of blue states. So I don't know if this is, that being Charlie Baker, by the way. So I don't know if this is a part of what we're going to see in a week and a half from today on Election Day. Do you have any predictions? Are we going to see what I certainly hope for, which is a major Republican victory, in that it's going to send the right message to the present administration? Or is it going to be a continual sort of divided nation between the red and the blue?
Yeah, I don't see this as a wave election. I think you go into these governor's races, like the one you just mentioned, which may demonstrate how bad a candidate Martha Coakley really is. You have to go, campaign by campaign here. I think that it's not going to be a good election for Democrats across the country. That's clear with Obama's numbers, things like that. At the same time, you end up with state by state races turning more on Landrieu. Is she going to become chair of the Energy Committee? Stuff like that. So I think that the other thing you need to take into account a little bit is that there is a lot of distrust of Washington across the board, not just from the Tea Party. The Congress is very, very unpopular. Obama's unpopular. Congressional Democrats, congressional Republicans are unpopular. And so what's really remarkable in some ways is the number of incumbents who are going to get elected, to say, as opposed to the ones that are going to get tossed out. What I'd say right now is, being on the ground in Kansas, we're going to talk about that state just for a second, that there's been a tremendous effort to get Republicans to return to the fold, moderate Republicans, particularly more to the right, and we're just seeing it looked like that was working. But we've now seen in both a governor's poll and a Senate poll out in the last 2 days, one yesterday and one today, that you have both Orman leading and Davis leading by 5 and 7 points. And these are Rasmussen polls, which polls are difficult this year. I think they're real hard. But it doesn't look like the return to the Republican Party is working quite as well as I think the Republicans, both Brownback and Roberts, had hoped.
What do you account for that?
I think that Brownback, the Brownback record, the tax cut record with the decline in revenues, really has taken a lot of people aback. The experiment, as of right now, isn't working. And I just think Pat Roberts, the Tea Party exposed Pat Roberts